We are going to talk about the Executive Order 14176, a declassification of records concerning the assassinations of President John F. Kennedy, Senator Robert F. Kennedy, and the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. So just waiting a few more minutes so more people can show up, and I'll get started. I'll get started. So just want to make sure that I'm live. Public. Good thing I checked. There was a delay. There's no audio. Where's the audio? Testing. I don't hear no audio. Oh, that's why. All right, I'm going to get started. So this is part 5. And the other parts, part 1 through 4, have 1, 2, and 3 have already been uploaded on YouTube, and the fourth will be the Part 4 will come out tonight at 8 o'clock. So this is part 5. And this the reason why I'm doing this video live is I find it to be very interesting, the occurrence of the assassinations of President or former President John F. Kennedy, Senator Robert F. Kennedy, and the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. So, for over 50 years, the true circumstances surrounding the assassinations of President John F. Kennedy, Senator Robert F. Kennedy, and Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. have remained shrouded in mystery, conspiracy, and official secrecy. Each of these assassinations shocked the world and marked a pivotal moment in American history. Yet, the investigations into their deaths have long been surrounded by skepticism and doubt. The official accounts have raised more questions than answers, leaving many to speculate about hidden forces behind these tragic events. The assassinations of these three iconic figures occurred during a time of intense political, social, and cultural behavioral in the United States. President Kennedy, who was assassinated in 1963, was at the helm during a tumultuous period that included the Cuban Missile Crisis, the Civil Rights Movement, and escalating tensions in Vietnam. Senator Robert F. Kennedy's assassination in 1968 came just as he was poised to run for presidency, offering hope for the country's future in the wake of his brother's death. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., whose wife was tragically cut short by an assassin's bullet in 1968, had become the leading voice of civil rights movements, calling for justice, equality, and peace. His death signified a profound loss for American people and the world. Okay, here we go. For decades, however, the official narratives surrounding these deaths have been mirrored in suspicious. The Warren Commission concluded that Lee Harvey Oswald acted alone in the assassination of President Kennedy, but many believe that Oswald was a mere pawn in a much larger conspiracy. Similarly, the assassination of RFK, committed by Sirhan, has been fraught with conflicting theories ranging from mental manipulation to political motives. And the true circumstances of Dr. King's assassination by James Earl Ray remain contentious. The involvement of potential conspirators such as government agencies, organized crime syndicates, and even foreign powers has remained a subject of intense debate. The narrative surrounding these deaths was further complicated by the fact that much of the investigative material was classified for years, and crucial evidence was hidden from the public eye. Document records, and testimonies that could shed light on the true forces at play were locked away in government vaults, adding fuel to the fire or conspiracy theories. Many believe that the government was pur- purposefully hiding critical information to protect powerful figures or institutions. But in January 2025, the landscape chart changed dramatically when President Donald J. Trump signed Executive Order 14176. This groundbreaking order mandated the declassification and public release of thousands of documents tied to the assassinations of JFK, RFK, and Dr. King. For the first time, the public was given access to a wealth of previously withheld information, further complicating the narrative but also offering new insights into the investigations and events surrounding these deaths. The release of these documents has raised even more questions than answers, revealing that new connections and raising suspicions about possible cover-ups. Among the newly declassification materials are, are intelligence reports, surveillance records, and internal communications from agencies like CIA, FBI, and the military that shed light on their roles in these assassinations. However, the relationships have also fueled further uncertainty as many of these documents are still heavily rededicated or incomplete, leaving gaps in these historical records. What remains hidden in these blacked out sections and why? Could there be other pieces of the puzzle still to be uncovered? The classifications of these records not only provides a glimpse into the past but also underscores the complexity of the investigations and potential complicity of powerful instructions. The involvement of intelligence agency, the military industrial complex, organized crime, and even foreign governments have been widely speculated, and the documents released under Executive Order 14176 now serve as a key to unlocking the deeper truths behind these national tragedies. However, while the release of these records represents a significant step towards transparency, it is clear that the full story of these assassinations may never be known. Some documents remain classified, some records have been destroyed, and some witnesses have long since passed away. What remains is a complex and incomplete picture, one that leaves room for continued investigation and speculation. All right, continue on. The truth about these assassinations, long buried under layers of secrecy, is slowly emerging, but as no information surfaces, it only adds the complexity of the puzzle. Was it the work of lone individuals, or was there a coordinated effort by powerful groups? What exactly did these newly declassified documents reveal, and how much more is still hidden from the public view? As these investigations continues, the more records are released, one thing is clear. The full story of these tragedies is still unfolding, and the pursuit of truth remains as urgent as ever. For more than half a century, the assassinations of President John F. Kennedy, Senator Robert F. Kennedy, and Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. have been shrouded in mystery, sparkling countless theories and debates. The official narrative suggests that each of these iconic figures was killed by a lone gunman, Lee Harvey Oswald, Sirhan Sirhan, and James Earl Ray, respectively, but the events surrounding their deaths have never fully convinced the public. Instead, many believe that there were more powerful forces at play, orchestrating these tragic moments from behind the scenes. In this episode, we dive deep into the newly declassified documents released under the Executive Order 14176, which have exposed a wealth of information previously hidden in government archives. These newly unveiled records are shedding light on the long secret activities of various intelligence agencies, government organizations, and even criminal syndicates. As we go through these documents, we'll examine the compelling evidence that suggests these deaths may not have been the work of isolated individuals, but rather the results of coordinated efforts from powerful forces who stood to gain from the removal of these influential leaders. Former from the FBI surveillance of Martin Luther King Jr. and the CIA covert operations during the Cold War to the possibility of mafia connections with deaths of both Kennedys, we'll explore how these agencies and shadowy organizations may have orchestrated their deaths. Whether driven by political motives, fear of changing the status quo, or even revenge, we will analyze how these forces may have sought to eliminate these men who represented hope, change, and pursuit of justice for marginalized groups. Were government agencies like the CIA and FBI actively involved in suppressing the truth, fabricating events, and creating cover ups? Did they collaborate with criminal organizations such as the Mafia, whose own interests were aligned with silencing these figures? We'll also explore the theories surrounding potential involvement from military industrial interest, how the policies of JFK, particularly regarding Cuba, Vietnam, and the Cold War, may have made him a target of those whose wealth and power relief on continued conflicts and instability. As we examine these declassified records, the goal is to move beyond the surface level facts and delve into the complex, intertwined relationships between these organizations and individuals. We'll analyze the roles played by intelligence operatives, political figures, and other key players who may have contributed to the political assassinations in 1960s, including the shocking possibility that these deaths were not merely isolated acts of violence but a part of far-reaching conspiracy. What is clear, however, is that documents that have been released, while revealing some answers, still leave many questions unanswered. In some cases, key sections remain redacted and the full scope of the conspiracy may never be fully revealed. As we explore the content of these documents, we will look for clues to pieces together a more complete picture, one, one that includes the hidden forces that may have manipulated events from the shadows. Join us as we investigate one of the largest political cover ups in modern American history, diving into the newly classified documents, uncovering buried truths, and analyzing the extent to which government agencies, intelligence operatives, shadowy organizations may have been involved in orchestrating the assassinations of JFK, RFK, and MLK. This is a deep dive into the untold story that has haunted American history for decades. All right, just take a be right 1 second. So just bear with me for a minute or two. If there's anyone watching, if you can just state in the comments that you're present, would be greatly appreciated. And okay, let me see. La, 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 la. Okay. All right. Let me read a couple more. Among the most scrutinized suspect in the assassinations of President John F. Kennedy, Senator Robert F. Kennedy, and Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. are the very agencies sworn to protect the nation, the CIA, and the FBI. These agencies, whose mission is to safeguard national security and uphold the rule of law, have been implicated in numerous conspiracy theories surrounding these high-profile killings. The newly released declassified files unveiled as part of the Executive Order 14176 have revealed shocking details about the extent to which these intelligence agencies were involved in the lives of the accused assassins, particularly in the case of Lee Harvey Oswald, the man believed to have killed President Kennedy. For decades, the official narrative has suggested that Oswald acted alone when he assassinated President Kennedy on November 22, 1963. From the Texas School Book Depository in Dallas. However, new evidence now suggests that Oswald may have been under the watchful eye of the CIA long before the tragic day, raising the question, was Oswald simply a lone gunman, or was he being watched, manipulated, or even orchestrated by powerful figures within the government or intelligence community? The newly released documents reveal that Oswald movement were closely monitored by the CIA before he became a suspect in the assassination. His time spent in the Soviet Union in 1959, his later return to the United States, and his interactions with various political figures were all meticulously tracked. The CIA was aware of Oswald's activity, including his attempts to defect to the Soviet Union and his pro-Castro sim, um, sympathies. These revelations are significant because they raise the question of whether the CIA was merely monitoring him due to his ideological beliefs and his interest in communist causes, or if they were actively involved in manipulating or controlling him. Some of the documents suggest that Oswald may have been under surveillance as part of broader CIA operations, including those focused on the Cold War and Cuba. During the period, the US government was deeply concerned about the spread of communism and the influence of Soviet Union, and Oswald's actions could have made him a convenient pawn in the CIA's larger geopolitical strategy. His association with pro-Castro organization and his outspoken views about the US government may have made him an ideal candidate for manipulation or even covert involvement in CIA's operation aimed at destabilizing foreign governments. There are also distributing questions raised by Oswald's behavior and actions in the months dealing up the assassination. According to some of the newly declassified documents, there were inconsistencies in the CIA's knowledge of Oswald's whereabouts, especially in the period leading up to the assassination. For example, Oswald's meeting with Soviet officials and pro-Castro groups in Mexico City, where he allegedly saw a visa to travel to Cuba, were reportedly not properly shared between the CIA and the FBI, a failure that allowed him to slip through the cracks of national security surveillance. This lapse in communication between the intelligence agencies had led many to speculate about the possibility of more sinister motives. Could Oswald have been a patsy who was set up to take the fall of the assassination? Or was he being used by the CIA or a covert operation that ultimately went terribly wrong? Some believe that Oswald's behavior, his defection to the Soviet Union, his seemingly erratic behavior upon his return to the United States, and his apparent ease in acquiring a rifle could have been a part of a larger orchestrated effort by intelligence agencies to position him as the perfect scapegoat for the assassinations of a sitting president. One of the most chilling questions surrounding this theory is whether Oswald was truly acting of his own violation or whether he was under some form of manipulation, coercion, or even mind control. Historically, evidence showed that the CIA was deeply involved in various psychological operations, psyop, during the Cold War, and some suggested that Oswald may have been a victim of such operation. The CIA's infamous MK Ultra program, which sought to explore mind control techniques, raises further suspicions. Were Oswald's action part of a larger covert operation gone wrong, or was he simply a convenient pawn for forces far more powerful than he realized? Okay. So whoever's watching, I really appreciate you staying with me. And if you just want to say, oh, okay. Hello there, Michael. Michael Alfano. Thank you for stopping by. And I really appreciate. If you have any thoughts, let me know. This is pretty interesting. So let me continue. Additionally, the CIA's role in the assassination have been a topic of intense scrutiny, particularly because of the agency's operation in Cuba, its ties to anti-Castro Cubans, and its role in U.S. foreign policy during the Cold War. JFK's stance in Cuba, including his failed attempt to overthrow Fidel Castro through the Bay of Pigs of invasion, made him a target of Cuban exiles, the mafia, and others who had personal political reasons to want him removed from office. Given these factors, some speculate that the CIA may have been deeply involved in orchestrating a conspiracy to remove JFK, possibly using Oswald as a cover to divert attentions away from those truly responsible. While the newly declassified files do not provide definite proof of CIA involvement in the assassination, they do highlight troubling gaps in information and communication between agencies that raises more questions than answers. Why did the CIA fail to adequately share critical information about Oswald's activity with the FBI and other agencies? Was he allowed to move freely across the international borders, making connections with the Soviet Union and Cuban officials? And most importantly, did the CIA see Oswald as a useful tool in a larger covert operations, either directly or indirectly contributing to the tragic death of President Kennedy? These questions remain at the heart of ongoing investigations into the assassination, and the newly released documents provide crucial pieces of puzzle. While they may not definitely answer whether Oswald was manipulated or controlled by the CIA, they undeniably suggest that the intelligence agency had a far deeper, more complex involvement in Oswald's life than the official narrative has ever acknowledged. Okay, let's see who else is it here. Cool. All right. So whoever's there, I want to see one person here, and I thank you for keeping up. If you can share this video, this live stream, I would greatly appreciate it, so we can get more people involved. And the more people, the better. They can hear what's going on, and with these assassinations that occurred in the 60s, 68s, 1968, 1970s. With these assassinations, it's pretty interesting. As we examine these newly declassified documents and continue to search for answers, one thing is clear. The truth behind the assassination of President Kennedy and the potential involvement of government agency, intelligence operations, and shadowy organizations remain a mystery. What role did the CIA play in the death of JFK, and how far were they willing to go protect their interests? These are questions that continue to haunt history, and they will likely remain unanswered until all of the relevant documents are fully disclosed. Then there's the FBI, led by J. Edgar Hoover, a man whose influence and control over the agency were absolute, and whose actions have come under increasing scrutiny in the years following the tragic deaths of President John F. Kennedy, Senator Robert F. Kennedy, and Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Hoover, the longtime head of the FBI, is known not only for his notorious surveillance and intelligence operations, but also for his deeply personal animus towards certain figures, particularly Dr. King and the Kennedy brothers. Hoover's actions have become the focal point of an ongoing investigation into the role of the FBI may have played, either directly or indirectly, in these political assassinations. In the case of Dr. King, Hoover's animosity was well documented and went far beyond the political responsibilities of an FBI director. Hoover saw King as a dangerous and subversive figure, not just because of his outspoken advocacy for civil rights, but because of his growing influence as a leader who could rally the American people for profound social and political change. The fact that Hoover's FBI went into extreme lengths to monitor, discredit, and undermine Dr. King through covert operations is chilling evidence of just how far Hoover was willing to go to protect the status quo. These operations, many of which were part of the infamous COINTELPRO counterintelligence program, were designed to destroy the reputations of political and social leaders whom Hoover and the FBI considered threats. COINTELPRO was a secret FBI program that sought to surveil, infiltrate, and disrupt civil rights organizations, anti-war groups, and left-wing activists during the 1960s. Dr. King, as the most prominent civil rights leader of the time, was the center of the FBI surveillance efforts. The declassification COINTELPRO documents, which have now come to light, reveal the extent of the FBI's campaign against the King. The Bureau engaged in wiretaps, eavesdropping, and the use of information to gather information on King and his associates. They also attempt to manipulate King's inner circle, sowing distrust and division within the civil rights movement. Some of the most damning documents show that the FBI even tried to pressure King to commit suicide by sending him an anonymous letter in which they attempted to blackmail him with supposed evidence of infidelity. The FBI's action against King were not just surveillance, they were meant to be a systematic attempt to destroy his character and credibility in the eyes of the American public. All right, so far so good. We're not even halfway. Maybe I should make this part two, a two-part. What do you think? Should I make this a part two? Let me know who's watching. Whoever's watching, just give me a sign or say part two or read the whole thing. That would be appreciated. Anyway, continue on. However, oh, and by the way, so this is part 5 if you tuned in late. So I have already posted part 1, 2, and 3 on my channel, and part 4, which gets pretty deep too. It's similar to this one. It's coming. I have it to come out at 8 o'clock tonight, so that's pretty interesting. It's a long video, so that should be very interesting. If you have the time to watch it, I would greatly appreciate it. So this is part 5, and let's continue. Let me continue. All right. So, however, as we dive deeper into these declassified documents, a darker, more sinister narrative begins to emerge. Was the FBI's surveillance and smear campaign against Dr. King simply part of a broader effort to neutralize a perceived threat to national security? Or did Hoover and the FBI play a more direct role in undermining King's effort, which ultimately contributed to his tragic assassination on April 4, 1968? Many critics have long suspected that the FBI's actions against King were not just part of a routine intelligence operation, but were part of a coordinated effort to eliminate a man who had potential to initiate widespread political and social upheaval. While Hoover's obsession with King is well documented, the agency's involvement in the assassination itself remains shrouded in mystery. What's crucial here is the timing and context of Hoover's action. Dr. King's assassination occurred just 5 years after the murder of President Kennedy, and many of these same dynamics, the FBI's suspicious activities, surveillance of political figures, and a hostile climate towards progressive leaders, were at play in both cases. The FBI Pervent attempted to discredit King, and the fact that the agency continued to withhold critical information about the assassination from the public, particularly regarding their own surveillance of King in the lead up to his death, raised important questions. Could Hoover's animus towards King have contributed to a broader conspiracy to have him silenced? Or was the FBI simply complicit in the largest web of forces that sought to eliminate those who stood in oppositions to the establishment? Hoover's personal relationship with the Kennedy family is also critical to understanding his role in these assassinations. The FBI director's obsession with both President Kennedy and his brother, Robert F. Kennedy, who, as Attorney General, was heavily involved in the fight against organized crime and civil rights abuses, adds another layer to complexity of the question who might have been behind the political killings in 1960s. Hoover and RFK famously clashed over the civil rights movement and the FBI's handling of organized crime investigation, with Hoover feeling that the Kennedys were undermining his authority. When JFK was assassinated in 1963, Hoover's FBI was quick to close the case, identifying Lee Harvey Oswald as the lone gunman. However, the persistence of conspiracy theories about the assassination and the involvement of various groups, including the CIA, mafia, and military-industrial complex, led to the continued scrutiny of Hoover's handling the investigation. After RFK's assassination in 1968, Hoover's reputation and influence were further questioned, especially in retaliation to his personal relationship with the Kennedy family. There are whispers and suspicions backed by declassified documents that Hoover's own personal motivation, his desire to maintain control over the nation's law enforcement agencies, and his personal disdain for those in power who oppose him. Many have led him to turn a blind eye to the true nature of these crimes. It's also important to remember that Hoover's influence within the FBI was immense. During his tenure, he handpicked agents who were loyal to him. The agency itself operated with a level of autonomy that made oversight difficult. As a result, Hoover's vendettas against certain figures were able to continue unchecked with devastating consequences for the lives of individuals like the king. All right. I hope you're finding this interesting. And again, as I said earlier, if you can let me know who's on, would greatly appreciate it. And if you share, like, subscribe, is also greatly appreciated. So if you, I was hoping you can share it so more people can come on. Will be appreciated. And like I said again, this is about halfway. Um, so if you, I don't know if I should do a part two. Um, if you think I should do a part two, let me know, and we'll come back again. If not, then I shall continue. So, declassified COINTELPRO documents not only highlighted Hoover's direct interference in the king's life, but also provided a broader context for understanding the FBI, culture surveillance, and the harassment in 1960. These documents confirm that the agency actions went far beyond monitoring King. They were designed to infiltrate his movement and destroy it from within. The FBI's desire to discredit King, undermine his influence, and portray him as a critical and a communist sympathizer was not just an act of political repression, it was systematic campaign aimed at running King's reputation and legacy in the eyes of the American public. But what remains most chilling about these revelations is the possibility that the FBI's actions were not just aimed at neutralizing King as a political force, but that they were also part of a larger, coordinated effort to silence a generation of political leaders who challenged the status quo. Was the FBI simply a tool of the establishment, or did it play a more direct role in the orchestration of political violence in the 1960s? The answer to these questions may never be fully clear, but the newly declassified COINTELPRO documents, along with the ongoing investigation into the deaths of King, the Kennedys, and others, continue to suggest that FBI's role in these tragedies may have been far more complex and far more sinister than previously imagined. The mafia's deep resentment towards President John F. Kennedy and his brother, Attorney General Robert F. Kennedy, is a well-documented chapter in the history of organized crime in America. The Kennedy administration's aggressive stance on cracking down on organized crime in the early 1960s created a potent and dangerous adversary in the form of the mafia. This ongoing battle between the Kennedy's brothers and the criminal underworld would set the stage for dramatic events surrounding the assassinations of both JFK and RFK, fueling numerous theories about mafia involvement and potential conspiracies. However, as we explore the possibility of mafia involvement, the question becomes not just whether the mob acted alone, but whether it was collaborating with other powerful forces, including government agencies or foreign entities, in orchestrating these high-profile murders. So let's look at number one, the JFK's crackdown on the mafia. One of the primary reasons for the mafia's animosity toward JFK was his administration's aggressive effort to combat organized crime. As president, JFK had appointed his brother, Robert F. Kennedy, as the Attorney General, and Robert immediately became a fierce adversary of the mafia. Under the RFK leadership, the Justice Department intensified investigations into the mob activities, targeting the major organization crime families in the United States. The Kennedy brothers were especially focused on the influence of the mafia in key cities like Chicago, New York, and Las Vegas, where crime when crime families had long operated with impunity. Robert F. Kennedy's zealous pursuit of organized crime made him a target of the mafia, which saw him as a threat to their operations. RFK's effort led to prosecution of high-ranking mobsters, and the U.S. government successfully convicted and imprisoned several notorious mafia figures, including individuals like Jimmy DeGent, Burke, and others linked to the infamous Luciano and Gambino crime families. The mafia's relationship with the Kennedys soured even further when RFK, determined to rule out corruption, also targeted mob connect unions and businesses, actions which struck a very heart of mafia operations. One of the most significant flashpoints between the Kennedy and the mafia was the investigation into the mobs tied to the labor unions, particularly those connected to the Teamsters under Jimmy Hoffa. Hoffa, a powerful union leader who had deep ties to organization crimes, was one of Kennedy's administration's key targets. RFK, determined to bring Hoffa down, intensified the animosity between the Kennedys and the mafia. Hoffa, along with numerous other mob figures, became increasingly hostile towards the Kennedys, viewing them as existential threats to their criminal empire. All right, so number 2, theories of mafia retaliation. Given the Kennedy's brothers' all out of war on the mafia, it's not surprising that various conspiracy theories have emerged, suggesting that the mafia may have played a central role in the assassinations of JFK and RFK. Many believe that the mafia, in retaliation of the Kennedy's crackdown, orchestrated the deaths of both brothers in order to protect their criminal enterprise from further exposure and protection. The theory that the mafia was involved in JFK's assassination primarily revolves around the idea of a mob conspiracy to eliminate a threat of its operations. Some point to the fact that in the months leading up to the Kennedy's death, the president had angered a variety of mafia figures. The most significant event fueled this theory is the failed Bay of Pigs invasion of Cuba in 1961, where mafia figures were allegedly involved in providing support to the Cuba's exile. Many mafia families had invested heavily in Cuba under the rule of dictator Fulgencio Batista, and the after Fidel Castro covert operations and the subsequent impositions of a blockade was seen as a betrayal by these criminal syndicates. Moreover, there is evidence suggesting that the mafia had possible links to Lee Harvey Oswald, the man accused of shooting JFK. Some researchers argue that Oswald's connections to figures in the mafia, such as Jack Ruby, who killed Oswald before he could stand in trial, suggested that the killing was more than a random act by a lone gunman. These theories speculated that the mafia, angered by JFK's policy, could have manipulated Oswald or even orchestrated the entire assassinations. All right. Okay, so moving right along. So, number three, the RFK assassination and the mafia. The theory that the mafia was responsible for RFK's assassination is even more pronounced. Robert F. Kennedy, as the Attorney General, was a major adversary of the mafia, and his assassinations on June 5th, 1968, came just 5 years after his brother's death. Many within the mafia saw RFK as a personal enemy who had ruined their ability to operate freely. The circumstances surrounding RFK's murder, along with the identity of the alleged assassins, Turan, have raised questions about whether the killing was the work of mafia or a larger conspiracy. Sirhan, a Palestinian Arab, claimed that the killing of RFK was of his pro-Israel stance. However, some researchers pointed to inconsistencies in Sirhan's confession and behavior that raised doubts about the true nature of his motivations. They suggested that Sirhan could have been a pawn in a larger conspiracy, potentially manipulated or even mind controlled by others to take the blame for a mafia plot. If the mafia was involved in the assassination of RFK, it would have been a clear message to those there to take on the criminal empire, as well as chilling act of retribution against the men who had worked so tirelessly to dismantle their operations. So, number four, the mafia and government agencies, a dangerous alliance. Well, the mafia role in the assassination of the JFK and RFK has been widely speculated. Another layer of complexities emerges where consideration whether the mafia acted alone or in concert with other powerful forces. One of the most troubling theories in that the mafia did not act independently but instead worked with intelligence agencies like the CIA and FBI, who had their own motives for wanting the Kennedy brothers out of the way. In particularly, the CIA involvement in covert operations in Cuba, Latin America, and other parts of the world is often cited as potential link between the agency and the mafia. The CIA's long-standing partnership with organized crime figures, particularly in their efforts to overthrow Fidel Castro, is well documented. The mafia's connections to Cuban exiles and their shared desire to see Castro overthrown created a convergence of interest between the two groups. If the CIA, in its covert efforts against Cuba, sought to eliminate the Kennedy brothers because they were perceived as being too weak on Cuba or too committed to investigating intelligence agencies, it is conceivable that the mafia could have been enlisted as an ally. Furthermore, some suggest that CIA clandestine operations, which often crossed ethical and legal lines, may have had overlapping interests with those of the mafia. The notion of a covert alliance between these two powerful entities, one with immense reach within the United States and the other with deep ties to organization crimes, adds a new layer to intrigue to the question of who was really behind the assassination of JFK and RFK. Where the mafia's action is killing the Kennedy brothers driven purely by revenge, or were they encouraged or even assisted by intelligence agencies that saw the Kennedy brothers as obstacles to their own hidden agenda. John F. Kennedy's decision to abandon the Bay of Pigs invasion remains one of the most contentious and pivotal moments in his presidency. The decision not only embarrassed the United States on the world stage, but also enraged a number of key groups that had a vested interest in overthrowing Fidel Castro's communism regime in Cuba. According to these groups, were the anti-Castro Cuban exiles who had been promised U.S. support for their invasion and the CIA operations who had helped orchestrate the covert mission. The aftermath of his failed operations, which ended in a humiliating defeat for the exiles and the CIA, left deep scars and created a climate of resentment and bitterness. Some conspiracy theories suggest that these groups, motivated by a sense of betrayal and revenge, may have had the means and the support to carry out drastic response to what they saw a fundamental betrayal by the Kennedy administration, potentially even orchestrating the assassination of President Kennedy. So, the Bay of Pigs invasion, background and failures. In 1961, President F. Kennedy approved a covert plan that had been initiated by two Eisenhower administrations. The invasion of Cuba by a group of anti-Castro Cuban exiles. The idea was to provoke an uprising among the Cuban population to overthrow Fidel Castro, the communist dictator who had taken control in Cuba in 1959. The operation was planned by the CIA and was meant to be a quick, decisive blow that would rid of Cuba communist government and possibly spark a wider rebellion. However, the Bay of Pigs invasion quickly turned into a disastrous failure. The exiled Cuban figures, trained and equipped by the CIA, landed at the Bay of Pigs on the southern coast of Cuba, only to be met with fierce resistance from Castro's force. The U.S. government had planned to provide air support for the exiles to prevent Cuba counterattacks. But Kennedy, who had recently taken office, had made the controversial decision to pull back U.S. air support at the last minute. Without air cover, with insufficient ground support, the exiles were swiftly defeated. Within 72 hours, the invasion was in ruins, and nearly 1,200 anti-Castro exiles were either captured or killed. The aftermath of the Bay of Pigs invasion was publicly embarrassment for the Kennedy, who had to act responsibility for the failure. It also sowed distrust and resentment within the Cuban exile community, many of whom felt betrayed by the administration's failure to provide promised support. The CIA, too, was left reeling from the disastrous outcome, as the failure of the operation exposed its lack of control over the situation and further eroded the public's trust in the agency. The fallout, betrayal of resentment. Many Cuban exiles, the Bay of Pigs failure became a symbol of broken promises. These were individuals had decided their lives to remove Castro from power, many of them having lost families members and property in the revolution that brought Castro to power. They had believed and been led to believe that the US government would support their efforts in overthrowing the Cuban regime. The failure of the Bay of Pigs left them feeling abandoned and betrayed. In addition, the CIA had been deeply involved in planning and execution of the invasion, and many of these agencies' operations had hoped that the mission would succeed in toppling Castro government. The CIA was also keen on providing its competency after the agency failure in dealing with Castro and growing influence of communists in Latin America. The embarrassment of the Bay of Pigs left both the CIA and the exiled Cuban community bitter and resentful. And there were many within both groups who felt that the Kennedy had not just failed them, but had personally let them down. One theory suggests that this sense of betrayal could have been one of the motivations behind the conspiracy of to assassinate Kennedy. With Kennedy's decision to cut support for the invasion, it is possible that both the exiled Cubans and the CIA operatives involved in the mission saw the need to take matters into their own hands. The idea that these groups might have felt justified in eliminating Kennedy to avenge that they saw as his failure to back them up and his subsequent public admission of guilt a compelling one. All right, it's still okay. Yeah, still got a little bit to go. Should I pause? Or should I go? Who was watching? Current viewers, one viewing. So, I'm going to go for a few more minutes, and then I'll end. I'll end and I'll continue later. So I got 3, 4, and 5. Okay, I'll do that. I'll read 3, 4, and 5, and then I'll stop there. So the Cuban exiles who had been involved in the Bay of Pigs invasion were not merely passive victims of a failed operation. They were deeply committed to the cause of removing Castro from power. Many of them had lost everything in the Cuban Revolution, including their homes, business, and families, as they saw the overthrow of Castro as a personal mission. To them, Kennedy's failure to support the invasion was not just a political blunder. It was a betrayal of their cause. By the early 1960s, many of these exiles had formed powerful networks, some of which were intertwined with the U.S. intelligence agencies. These networks had access to considerable resources, including weapons, intelligence, and logistical support, and some believed that they could still bring about Castro's downfall. This time, through more extreme measures, Kennedy's actions, particularly the abandonment of the Bay of Pigs invasion, left these groups with a burning desire for revenge, and some believe that this desire could have motivated them to take violent actions against the president. One of the most persistent theories in conspiracy circles is that the Cuban exiles, working with the mafia and possibly CIA, conspired to assassinate Kennedy as punishment of his failure to support them. The mafia, which had its own animosity towards Kennedy due to his brother's effort to crack down on organized crime, had deep ties with Cuban exiles, groups who were also angry at Kennedy. These exiles had the motivation and, crucially, the means to act against the president. The CIA's involvement with Cuban exiles extended well beyond the Bay of Pigs invasion. In the years following the invasion, the CIA continued to fund the support Cuban exile groups in their attempts to overturn the Castro. Just give me 1 second here. Ah. All right. Okay, let me see. Hmm. One second. Okay. All right. Okay, let's continue. The theory that the CIA, in collaboration with Cuban exiles and mafia figures, might have orchestrated Kennedy's assassination is grounded in the fact that the CIA had a history of working with organized crime figures in Cuba. The CIA had long used mafia figures in its sorry about that. The theory that CIA, in collaboration with exiles and mafia figures, might have orchestrated Kennedy's assassination is, is grounded in the fact that the CIA had a history of working with organized crime figures in Cuba. The CIA had long used mafia figures in its covert operations to overthrow Castro, relying on them for everything from intelligence gathering to sabotage operations. After the Bay of Pigs debacle, some of these same exiles of mafia figures might have seen Kennedy as a threat to their cause, and with access to necessary resources, they could have potentially carried out a plot to remove him from power. Moreover, the CIA continued efforts to undermine Castro and its dissatisfaction with Kennedy's handling of Cuba, especially his stance on the Cuban Missile Crisis, may have contributed to a growing sense of urgency and resentment within the agency. Now, the notion that these Cuban exiles, with CIA and mafia support, could have acted in concert with eliminating Kennedy is not just based on speculations. There are numerous accounts of covert operations involving Cuban exiles. The Mafia and the CIA during this period, some of which involved attempts to assassinate Castro himself. The idea that the Cuban exiles, CIA operations, and Mafia figures were involved in a broader conspiracy to assassinate JFK, one of that has endured for decades. While there is no exclusive evidence to provide this theory, the potential collaboration between these groups, untitled by their resentment towards Kennedy policies and the failure of the Bay of Pigs invasion, cannot be easily dismissed. The assassination of President Kennedy was not even the act of lone gunmen, but the culminating of a complex web of motivations, betrayals, and secret alliance, many of which trace back to the deeply contentious events surrounding the Bay of Pigs invasion. Ultimately, whether or not the Cuban exiles and their CIA backers were directly involved in Kennedy's assassinations remain a question that haunted investigators and conspiracy theorists for over a half a century. But what is clear is that the Bay of Pigs invasion and its disastrous outcome left a devastating legacy of anger, mistrust, and desire for revenge, for which could have played a significant role in the tragic events on November 22nd, 1963. Lee Harvey Oswald, Sir Ron, and James Earl Ray, three names that have been etched into the annals of history as the lone gunmen responsible for three of the most shocking political assassinations of the 20th century. Oswald is accused of killing President John F. Kennedy. Sirhan of assassination Senator John F. Kennedy, and Ray of taking the life of Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. For decades, the official narrative has painted them as lone individuals acting on their own, driven by personal motives. However, the newly declassified documents providing a chilling perspective, one of them suggested these men may have been set up as a scapegoat, manipulated or coerced into committing their crimes, or even framed by powerful figures with much more to hide. So, I'm going to stop here. And then I will continue later, continue the second half of, I'll continue the second half tomorrow. Continue this half tomorrow. So I appreciate everyone that stopped by. Let's see if he's still on. I think he's still on. Right, Mike? You still on? You still participating? What do you think so far? So yeah, I'm gonna stop here and I'm gonna continue. If if you can share this video, support it, so next time I can get more viewers, and I would really appreciate it. And hopefully people will comment, chat on the chat, and that's it. All right. So see you tomorrow, and enjoy the rest of the day.